Okay, well, firstly, I'm coming in from the land of the Moge in Mount Hagen, which traditionally was called Gomis. And the Moge were the original landowners. And when the first Europeans came in and set foot, they accepted them, and they established what is now Mount Hagen, which was a German. He was a German. I think it was in the. It was on the coast when the Germans had New Guinea, and he was the first to come in and locate Mount Hagen, and his name was Kurt von Hagen, and this was then named as Mount Hagen or Mount Hagen, but the traditional name is Gomis. So I'm more than privileged to be able to come to you from here, and from wherever you're all located. I am certain that those that have gone ahead have bequeathed everything that's in and around and under your feet to be able to enjoy and to have your presence in this day. So we thank those that have bequeathed everything that we have around us to enjoy. So welcome everyone. Thank you. Okay, Jeanne, it's over to you.
Thanks, Michael. I'll just spotlight myself. Welcome everybody to Pacific Peacebuilders in Conversation. This session of the Raising Peace Festival is held in the lead up to the United Nations Day of Peace tomorrow. And I would like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the traditional owners on the land on which I live and work. And I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. This always will be Aboriginal land. And using the chat function, please feel free to introduce yourselves. So the Raising Peace Network is an alliance of more than 30 organisations that together are working to share ideas, knowledge and inspiration for a peaceful world. To learn more about what the network is about, go to our website at raisingpeace.org.au. All the sessions at this event are recorded and will be replaced on our website in the next few weeks. So to begin with, please mute yourselves. You can place questions for the speakers in the chat. If you have any resources to share, you can share them in the chat too. And please don't engage in debate in the chat. I will now hand it back to Dr. Michael Mell, who will be our moderator for this session, Pacific Peacebuilders in Conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeanne, and for welcoming us there as well. And welcome to every one of you, to all of us here. And as they appear on the screen, as I have it in front of me, Jeanne, thank you, Jeanne Wills from SafeGround, John Rodsted, thank you, Yauka Liria, we have Michael Mecca, and Mette Elisiosen, I hope that's the correct pronunciation. And then we have Ben Zion Ariuna. So thank you all. And there may be one other or a couple of others. Yeah, there's a few others. So I welcome you all rather than taking time to call each and every one, but just in general now. Thank you very much for joining this session. And we look forward to the presentations as well as our interactions as we travel through. We've got it pretty much lined up in the way that there are presenters. We will have basically a little bit of time, meaning if I can say about 5 or so minutes of presentation and of each of us, and then we can have a little bit of time for any immediate questions soon after someone finishes. If we've got a burning question or a comment that we'd like to add, then I think we could provide room for that, and then we go on to the next speaker. And when we all have had our opportunities, then we can come back and provide for general comments and questions and interactions, hopefully. So that's basically how we will go. If for some reason the technology plays up and any one of us drops out, hopefully Jeanne will try and see if we can rope in people if we can and if we're able to. But otherwise, we just touch wood, as they say, or as we say in Melpa, in Hagen, those that went before us are in charge of us. If we are about the good, then that's the main thing, because that way we're still intact until our time is finished in terms of this conversation. So welcome everyone, and we look forward to your comments and your interactions. Just in the line of and the order of things that I have, we have Yauka, Liria, if you wish to have that first opportunity. I am more than happy to go that way, following you with my comments of 5 or so minutes. And then Jeanne, John, I think will go following us. And then Jeanne, if you want to go from there, if that's okay with you.
Of course.
So if I can say it that way, then that gives us a little bit of an order of proceedings, and then we can go from there to the rest of our members that are in for this chat and conversation. So at this point in time, I'm more than happy, Yauka, if you wish to take the floor and share with us your pointers and for the time that I've allowed. And if we could do it that way until he finishes, and then we go. But if the time's up, I'll try and let you know to wind up so that we all can have an opportunity to interact and converse as we travel. Thank you, Yauka.
Thank you, Dr. Mel. I'm happy to go along with your program. Can you hear me well on the other end? I believe you all can receive me well.
Yes,
no problem.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Firstly, thank you for inviting me to participate in this conversation. As you know, I'm with INA, Institute of National Affairs. It's a think tank in Port Moresby. But my views currently in this conversation are obviously from me personally, and I don't necessarily speak on behalf of INA, and my comments and so forth are not representative of INA. I think I just briefly make that clear. So personally, this what I may say during this conversation are just personal observations. I'm excited to hear and follow what you people have been organizing. I've gone through your website as well. Actually, be honest with you, I wasn't aware that you had such a program going on. And I'm really excited to know that you have such a program going on in the Pacific, trying to promote and develop a peaceful Pacific. So I'm very excited to be part of this conversation. For my contribution, it's basically I would want to share with you all my experiences and my perspectives on intergroup or intercommunal conflict in Papua New Guinea. So let me just go through some of the points that I want to bring to the audience. The first point I want to touch on is the general scenario of intercommunal conflict in the country, or a little bit on historical aspects as well. Okay, the intergroup or intercommunal conflict in PNG, generally it's referred to using various names. Sometimes it's referred to as inter-ethnic conflict. Other times it's referred to as intergroup. So I would refer to all of that as intercommunal. That's against another group, but both of them or all of them are coexisting within a given locality or given community. So if we look at the intergroup or intercommunal conflicts in PNG, this conflict was particularly historically associated with the highlands region or the highlands part of Papua New Guinea, and they used to be called tribal fights. I'm from the islands area as well, from Southern Islands, and I can remember during my school years in the 70s, 80s, there were a lot of intercommunal conflicts, or what used to be called tribal fights, up in the highlands. And that gave rise to the formation of special police units called the Mobile Police Force, or the Mobile Squads. It was created as a result of the government of PNG trying to get a handle on these intercommunal conflicts or tribal fights. So this kind of conflict was particularly restricted to the highlands region of Papua New Guinea. In other parts of the country, it may have occurred as well, but not frequently and not in a very widespread manner as seen up in the islands. So that kind of conflict came to the authorities came to get a handle on it and control it, and it kind of I wouldn't say it died away, but the frequency got pretty reduced to a very small conflicts in isolated areas of the islands. Over the last few years, this has suddenly sprung up. So I would say over the last 5 years, if my memory is correct, I've seen intercommunal conflicts gaining a strong momentum in the highlands area, particularly in Enga province, and then in parts of Southern Islands, and in Hela province, and also spreading into other parts of Papua New Guinea, including the once peaceful coastal areas, such as Milne Bay in Morobe province, in Madang province recently, and also in East Vic province. So that's the kind of environment I've witnessed in PNG. And although, as I said, it's kind of died down as a result of government action, or as a result of the work of the churches, or as a result of the presence and work of the special police force called the Mobile Force. Over the last 5 years or so, I've seen a resurgence. The conflict has really picked up. In the islands of PNG, this is now, I think, truly a widespread incident, starting in from Kainantu in Eastern Islands, all the way to Hela, and even closer to my own home in Pangia, our neighboring district in Kagoerawe. It's engrossed in communal conflicts. And in Enga province, it's now widespread all throughout the province, and it's a huge problem out there. And also in Hela, it's become a very big problem, and I believe in parts of Yauka and Western Islands as well. Western Islands, particularly over in areas in Tambu, Anabile district, and in areas where there used to be a large coffee plantation. called Wagimek coffee plantations. There's been an ongoing communal violence in there. Dr. Mel would know more about that. So there is a huge problem for the country because intercommunal conflicts, as you know, occurring in mostly is occurring in the rural areas, and the government authorities in these countries in the rural areas are not visible. We have a pretty weakened, if you like, very weakened, very low or remote. The presence of government authorities very remote, and in that environment, obviously, people's livelihoods get really affected by intercommunal conflicts. So it's a big problem, and when I look at the government policies and the government agencies which can be responsible in addressing communal conflicts, I see that really, as far as policy is concerned, there is no specific policy framework in place currently to address intercommunal conflicts. But you could say it's in the related area of policing and law and order. So generally, you could place it under police and under the Department of Justice and Attorney General. And also you could place this under Department of Community Development and Religion. However, when I try to identify which particular agency may be responsible for intercommunal conflict, addressing intercommunal conflict in the country, I don't really see one particular government agency been placed in a position of responsibility. And also, as I mentioned earlier, there's no particular policy framework in place to address this. It's an area that authorities really need to look into. And hopefully conversations like this can contribute to. The other point that I should raise is the availability of expertise in the country to deal with intercommunal conflicts. I'm referring to people with formal training, education training in peace and security studies, conflict resolution studies. The 2 points I should mention here. Firstly, it's kind of a new space or new area for the country. And secondly, most of or in fact, I think all the higher institution of higher learning are not offering any courses or programs in this area. Dr. Mel, I think, would know on that, and he can correct me if I'm wrong there. But I did do a brief study survey into this in universities in the country, and I found out that not one institution is offering any program, a degree program, diploma program, or higher in this area of in this particular space, conflict resolution, peace and security studies. So I think there's a deficiency there that needs to be looked into. Because when you talk about addressing these issues at the district level, at the provincial level, where all the crises are happening, you need people with the appropriate qualification, competencies to be there at the subnational level. And right now, it's pretty deficient area that needs to be looked into seriously. Okay, let me quickly just move into case studies, or I want to give example of some of the conflicts that we've witnessed, so you can get visualize actually the conflicts that take place, what's involved, and so forth. Okay, there was some conflict, intercommunal conflicts. I'll just run through. One was in is an ongoing one in Bogia resettlement area. Many in the highlands areas, as I've already mentioned, in Eastern Islands, Kainantu, Okapa, Lufa, now another one recently started in Ben area. In my own province in Southern Islands, there's been ongoing ones in Mendi district area, and also in Kago-Erab area, and in Nipa area, and in El province, many districts with intercommunal and in these conflicts, even in the coastal areas, we've experienced conflicts in parts of Moro province, recently in Wewak. Now, when these conflicts in these areas rise, you would normally have two or more groups. Usually they're tribal groups, but they can also be groups from different ethnic communities living in one, say in a squatter settlement area like in Wewak. So they're not necessarily ethnic groups, but they could be from different areas, and they would team up. So when you have this kind of conflicts, typically you will have two groups or more, and they may fight over, the conflict may be triggered by ongoing legacy issues. They could relate to traditional issues or related to traditional rivalry fighting in the early days, pre-colonial days, or they could be related to more modern issues like access to reaching you out there. Are you hearing me? Hello there.
Okay, now.
I can hear.
Yep. We can hear you, Yauka.
You can hear me? Okay. Okay, thank you. I'll just, thank you. I'll just try to continue and finish off. So in these typical intercommunal conflicts, you know, they yes, hello. You could have anything between 10 people on either side to hundreds on either side. And they would normally be armed with all kinds of assorted weapons, traditional weapons, and now increasingly they would have guns and modern arms at their disposal. So they are using those as well. And they would normally attack each other, destroy properties. And if one side has the upper hand, they would do all the damage, destroy properties, take lives of the other side. But often the other side would normally go and regroup, and they would also arm themselves, and at times they will even go and seek assistance from their traditional partners, alliances, and that's how the problem escalates. And they would do a counter-attack after a day or after a couple of days. And the usual way the government authorities have responded to this is to treat it as a law and order issue, and they would assign a special police unit called a mobile squad to go and deal with these problems. And the mobile squads normally go in, they visit the area and stay in an area for a couple of hours, couple of days, and then bring the two sides together. They have a meeting of a sort, and then it's over. They call it peacemaking, and obviously it's not the perfect way to bring peace because all the underlying issues remain unresolved. So in a nutshell, that's how the PNG intercommunal conflicts are seen in this country. And that's how usually the authorities address it. They address it in a typical law and order issue. Structured peace-making, peace-building program is followed. So it's usually spontaneous 1 day or 1 hour meeting and it's over. Okay. So that's the kind of environment I find here. And in a way of summary, I would say throughout the country, as the country develop and as local communities try to look after themselves, we would see a rise in intercommunal conflicts, and authorities really need to treat this as an emerging development issue and look at options on how this should be addressed. Options such as I said, proper policy framework is needed. That includes allocating responsibility to a particular agency. And in the area of competency and professional people, development of professional people, the higher learning institutions need to see the demand out there. I think the country has a demand and they need to start offering programs in peace and security studies, conflict resolution studies. So those are my two observations, and maybe I've talked a lot. So I would stop there and ask for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Yauka, for that and for providing a introductory canvas in relation to peace and the need for and the challenges that PNG faces, and in particular your reference to your own community and in the highlands in some of the ways that the aspect of peace being maintained, or if it comes into situations of conflict, the challenges of now with a country that's shifting and changing, how we need to now develop aspects of people who can be identified as peacemakers, and the process of peacemaking in the communities, but also in the overall sense of Papua New Guinea as a country, as an emerging country or nation. If it's okay, before I go, if there's a comment or any observations that any one of us who's listening and or watching would like to throw in, I'm more than happy to allow for that. Otherwise, I'll go straight into what I have for my little bit of the time before we get into the next speakers. If there is, yeah.
I'd like to ask, are there any initiatives from the community for peace building?
Yauka, you can answer that. I've got a response, but I'll let you, because it's you've presented, I'll let you go.
Okay, thank you. Yes, initiatives coming from several angles. We have international NGOs who are doing some work in this, in isolated areas up in the highlands, for example, in Eastern Highlands. And now there is a program run through by or rolled out by EU and partner agencies. It's called Peace Building, Stability, or something, violence, anger, and probably Western Islands, but it's a Polish of international organizations working on that. Aware of many been involved in this, except on Bougainville. Yes, there are churches as well as NGOs who are involved in this, and they've contributed a lot to finding peace on Bougainville. I must mention that. But there is no serious government-administered program rolled out in the conflict areas that I've mentioned, or in other parts of the response. At the community level, obviously, individual communities, when exchange gifts, say sorry to each other, etc. So we do have that kind of traditional type of peacemaking going on in different parts of the country. I hope that answers.
Yes, thank you.
Your question.
Thank you, Yauka, for that response. There is another question in the chat box for you, but probably we should move forward and keep going, and then we can come back to it. And the question relates to the fact that to the mobile police, and the question is, do these the mobile police units, have they had any training in peace building or peace processes that they could initiate when they go into a situation of intergroup or intertribal conflicting situations? That's a question that's there. So you can respond to it after each of us have done our presentations. And I think it'd be good to connect with that because there's some issues there. I'll now just move on to what I'd like to share with you. One of the first things I wanted to say is in relation to PNG over the last, we are now just a week ago or a few days ago, we celebrated the 47th anniversary of political independence. And 47 years, that is, we achieved independence, political independence in 75, and it's 47 years since that time, and in relation to peace. I'd like to begin to share my talk with a small sharing that I had about 3 weeks ago, and I was with quite an elder in Enga who I happened to meet in a meeting. And we were talking about other things and about the shifting changes of our communities, and particularly in village communities, and then the emerging urbanized communities that are now cropping up in and around our towns, and the migrating populations, and the issues and challenges that face our systems of government, levels of government, and the kinds of changes that are now happening at a cultural level that are now in some ways conflicting, in some ways adding value to who we are as a people. And one of the points he mentioned, and I think it would be an apt story to share, particularly as an introduction to my presentation in peace and peace building. He basically said the highlands communities were, and in particular in Enga and places like that, in order to make peace, in order to achieve things, the pig was a very significant aspect to our community's well-being, in terms of value, in terms of as a source of food, as a source of wealth, and relationship building, in how the pig, amongst other things that were considered of value, was a significant aspect. One of the main things he said was the pig, being an animal, had to be managed. And that managing of domesticated pigs was for that pig to be tethered when at night at home, kept in a house, tethered when it was let loose or let out, to go to be tied to a tree or some bushes, so that the pig could then go ahead and dig and collect for or look for food, if you like. So the rope or the tethering of the pig was a very important aspect to maintaining the animal and to keeping that animal in-house or keeping it in order. Because if you let loose, that pig could go into a garden, it could go into someone else's property, and that would create many challenges. So tethering a pig was very important. Human beings in times past, tethering, of course, is not a part of our erasing youth, but one of the most important things was having a roundhouse where our up-and-coming youth were brought in and given the lessons of life, of orderliness and conduct, so that our youth were trained and articulated in that way to begin to become responsible members of the community. And being responsible, you would want to keep law and order, you want to maintain peace. On most occasions, if things did go out of hand, people would pursue peace at all costs and in all times and occasions. Sometimes it was never quite quick, but in the end, people looked for peace. Today, the roundhouse houses are no longer built. Our communities are no longer living in villages surrounded by a roundhouse and a peacemaking facility where we could talk things through, where we could negotiate our way through. Those systems have failed. And we are now being replaced with classrooms where our children get to education, and then they move on and into further education for those who have the opportunity. But most do not have that opportunity because there are places that these places are limited. And we can't exactly tether our youth. So where do we and how do we articulate peace when the shifting cultures and youth that are now disenfranchised are left to their own devices? Therein lies our challenges. And I think we had a long chat about options and opportunities of how we could address this. But I think that story provided the nub of, for me, a major challenge where PNG at the crossroads of traditional communities and with now a government and at a national level, at a provincial level, at a district level, where elected councillors, elected local leaders and politicians are both harbingers of economic development, but also people who are responsible for peace and peacemaking and leading through to enhancing peace. And the challenges are very much about having places where you can go and gather and bring communities together. And the old places of the roundhouses are no longer there. People are now moving away from the villages, going into urban centers, looking for opportunities. And the breakdown of our communities that way makes it even harder for councillors or for elected leaders or anyone advocating for peace to bring communities together. So there is a great need for community-based leadership, and process of peacemaking needs to be instituted. So that's one of the challenges of challenges in Papua New Guinea, where cultural change has provided for a lot of challenges, where one set of values, one set of ways of making peace, to eventually come to the crossroads of sudden changes that have come to as a part of the changes that PNG as a country now is now engaged in. And so the challenges of traditional communities no longer the same, and urbanized youth and communities, urban development and growth, there is no community level peacemaking, or if there are pockets rather than whole changes and shifts to accommodate for the shifting landscape. Yauka mentioned about the police and the police in the way that they have gone. And I think that's something that we can talk about later, and Yauka may share a little bit more given the question that was asked. But in relation to peace and good order and peace and peacemaking in PNG communities, the government now in recent years has been able to develop provincial governments, local level government councils, and then of course, national levels of government. So there are 3 tiers, if you like, of governance. And we just recently, about a month ago, finished the national elections. The national elections, and just tied down to specifically to peace and peace building, has been a very difficult elections. The amount of violence and the amount of lives lost and properties lost has escalated. So in that sense, ideas of democracy, of people's having a choice and participating in a democratic process, it's really developed into something quite in contrast, I think, to the the general definition of what a democratic process, one person, one vote. I think those have really brought in some major challenges for PNG as a country, and a country that's come from one set of values to another set of values, from looking at communities and now looking at a nation state, and how you define yourself as a nation, and how you connect with it, and particularly in matters of peace and peacemaking. The government, in the context of arranging some of these things, has developed, and this has happened over the last 10 years, where in the province, for example, there are smaller communities that have been set up, particularly with the provincial, but also local level government councils, where there is a committee, a peace and good order committee. And the Peace and Good Order Committee is made up of councillors and other well-placed and respected persons, mostly male, but in some of those places there have been 1 or 2 women that have really been outspoken, and particularly in building and developing peace. And those people are, if you like, intermediaries between the various conflicting parties. But more than that, they take on some of the conventions of approaching peacemaking through traditional, or if you like, customary process of peacemaking, as opposed to Western law process of peacemaking, where individuals rights, as it were. Because quite often a lot of these communities still connect with themselves as units, but units made of communities through cultural relationships or through family relationships. So the Peace and Good Order Committee has been one that I've seen operate, and that has been part and parcel of resolving some of those conflicts that happen amongst communities. In the elections that I've spoken of, there has not been a lot of the actions and activities of the Peace and Good Order Committee, because the recent elections have been national elections, and the challenges have been many. There's a lot of people that are now still aggrieved by the results of the elections, and still continuing to feel that it wasn't a fair election at all. But in relation to peace and peacemaking, some of the efforts that have been made, particularly in bridging the traditional communities or communities of the past and the systems that were there and then, to bringing on new systems or systems of a Western process of peace and peacemaking, where negotiations, discussions, and processes of talking things to death, if you like, are very significant to traditional processes of community and of community peacemaking. The levels of violence now have obviously increased, particularly domestic violence, particularly with the increase of marijuana and other drugs that have begun to emerge into the community. Our youth feeling disenfranchised, provides for a lot of challenges in relation to places, in relation to urbanized centers, and also in village communities where youth have really gone to school, but yet who find no hope or no opportunities. And in those cases, there are emerging challenges as well, and for our communities, but more so as a country. And I think one of the points that Yauka mentioned in our systems of education, at early education right through to tertiary education, the process of articulating peace, the process of finding a peace as a first option rather than the least of the options, of violence and other reactions and responses should not be the first, should never be, or shouldn't be part of any process. But as it so happens now, peace seems to be very hard to find in many of our communities and many of our shifting communities, and particularly in urban centers, where many other influences have begun to overtake. So there is a great need now, not only in schools, but also in higher education, but more so the government now needs to take more and more of an influence of setting up structures, possibly of ensuring that peace and meting out peace and offering peace, making solutions to communities that are now disenfranchised, who feel that communities that were once together are now no longer, or are fracturing. And in this new landscape, finding processes of peacemaking that are built on traditional processes, but at the same time engaged with some of the new and emerging ways in which peace can be built and developed in our communities. So for PNG, the challenges are many, particularly coming from communities that are very strong and founded on levels of community.
I think we may have lost Michael momentarily. Michael, are you there? Oh, damn. Well, we might, maybe if Michael can reconnect at the end, he can finish his talk on articulating peace from an early education stage. And hopefully you guys can save your questions for him at the end. I think I will pass it on to John Rodsted to continue the session. Ooh.
Okay, folks, thanks for the opportunity to have a chat, and great that we've got this forum together. Sorry, Michael, that the technology let us down yet again, or let you down yet again. Let's hope you can come back in. Just before he cut out, something that he really said that rang a bell with me is the first option of any conflict should be to create peace, not to get through conflict and then try to create a peace post it. Because if you think about what a conflict is going to create, you're going to basically, destroy your psyche, destroy your economy, destroy your agriculture, destroy your cities, and then bring yourself back to a negotiated point, create a negotiated peace, which is the position you basically began from, where you had a position of non-negotiation that took you to conflict. So yes, trying to make peace that first step, that first position, really should be the aim of all players. Now, I'm with SafeGround, and one of the things that we've been dealing with for over 20, 30 years is the legacies of war. So I come at it from the other end. Once a conflict has taken place and the amount of dangerous material that's left behind, that keeps a community living in a dangerous cycle permanently. And it is the case of permanence. That originally we were the Australian campaign to ban landmines. We worked on that treaty, which was successful in 1997. And what a landmine actually did was a simple dumb device that went into the ground, denied land use to anyone, whether it's military or civil. And it was a dangerous thing that hunted victims permanently until they are removed. So what we've been looking at in regards to the Pacific is the legacies that have been left over from World War II. Now, World War II in the Pacific is effectively coming up to 80 years ago. It's a long time ago, and a lot of munitions were expended, but also just imported into the Pacific and have been left to be a dangerous legacy ever since. You know, multiple generations have come and gone since the war ended, and they're still living in communities that are saturated with bombs, either expended or unexpended from World War II. And it is just an outrageous situation. Very recently in the Solomon Islands, there's been a string of injuries and deaths created by accidental or purposeful interaction with munitions that have been left over since World War II. One which was in 2020 was a community group was having a barbecue to raise some funds for some things they wished to purchase. And an artillery shell from World War II under the ground detonated, killing a few of them and wounding many others. It is completely unacceptable that this sort of problem should still be existing 80 years after a conflict has ended. And the perpetrators of that conflict, and, you know, naming and shaming, it's America, Japan, Australia, particularly in the Pacific, and other players, need to put as much effort into cleaning up these problems as the effort was made into making the problem back in the 1940s. And that's where one of the great issues lies, is that at the end of the war, people were in a hurry to head home, and they did. And they basically left communities saturated with munitions that should have been disposed of. The big ammunition supply points should have been disposed of, let alone the battlefield areas where there'd been failed munitions fired all over the place. And here we are years later. We've got communities that are trying to move on and to use their land for farming or for housing, or there's urban expansion, and they're moving into a dangerous environment because of the munitions that have been there for 80 years. You know, Honiara is a good example. You've got a major population growth in that city, and they're pushing out into the areas which were the first battlefields of World War II between Japan and America. The Guadalcanal battlefields are exactly where Honiara is built, right on top of Point Cruz and Bloody Ridge. All of those are now the suburban areas of Honiara. And as people are moving into these places, no, it's not that they actually want to move into a battlefield. They have to. They need the land. They need to build houses. They need to build schools. They need to go and create farming opportunities. They don't have a choice of going elsewhere, but it's land that is saturated with munitions. So what they're moving into is a long-term legacy, a long-term dangerous legacy that's never been cleared up. And this is something that at SafeGround we try to take on. We try to do a research project and then launch it, particularly aimed at the United Nations. We launch these things into the UN to try and be a conversation starter between where there's a problem and where there potentially could be a solution. And by a solution, I mean money, proper money, large investment from countries that can help clean up these issues that have been left behind. Now, if you think of the scale of World War II in the Pacific, going as far south as the Solomon Islands, all the way north to the Aleutians, east out towards the Marshalls and Hawaii, and west out towards Burma, it's a massive area. But a lot of these places have been ignored, and have been ignored when it comes down to investment in clearing up the legacy that's left over. This is the kind of stuff we do at SafeGround. We'll do a research project. We'll get in there, do a whole lot of field research, and then we push it at the UN, and we try to be that bridge from a problem to get the conversation running to people who've got the ability to help create a solution. And there's abilities out there. I mean, the Solomon Islands is a great example. The Royal Solomon Islands Police Force have got an exceptional bomb disposal team, but again, they're limited by budget and by how many people they can actually train and what they can deploy. And who's going to speak after me is Michael Macca, who has set up, he's one of the former Solomon Islands Police Force bomb disposal technicians who's set up a civil organisation to try and deal with the legacies that have been left over. But the bottom line is there needs to be as much effort in cleaning up these this legacy that's been left over as there was in making the problem in the first place. And you simply need to relegate this into the back pages of a history book to say, well, yes, World War II happened a long time ago, and it's not, it doesn't create any dangerous impact anymore. But of course, in that process, before the land is totally clear, there will be more injuries, there will be more victims, there'll be people injured, and there'll be people killed. Now, sadly, once a person's killed, you're out of the equation. But for the people who are injured, it's certainly going to have an effect on them for the rest of their lives and for their families for the rest of their lives. And they need support as well. So it's another factor that needs to be considered. So simply, we need to have good, solid dialogue that when these conflicts do take place, that munitions are left behind and they need to be taken out of the communities, the cycle of the community as quickly as possible. So we don't have accidental interactions with them resulting in death and injury. And we also don't have purposeful interactions with them where people, courtesy of poverty, will search out munitions to recycle into using for, say, dynamite fishing, which destroys the environment, creates intersocial tensions, and also risks the people who are doing the activity. No community is better off when they've got a lot of munitions laying around in their society. And the sooner they're cleaned up, the better. So I'll stop at that, and I'm sure Michael, as a practitioner of bomb disposal, will have some good things to say as well. And thanks for your time.
Thank you, John. Yeah, sorry, I had got cut off as well on that one, but we'll just keep going. Yeah, Michael, if you'd like to take on from there. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Doctor. As John has said, that the UXO issue in Solomon Islands is quite tense at the moment because of the expanding population and development. Quite an issue that is popping up within the government, Ministry of Police and the national government, possibly by issues of funding and manpower issue with the police. At the moment, the police hasn't got the manpower to take care of the UXO issue in Solomon Islands. They are part of the normal duty police officers. When there is an operation planned for the whole country, they will engage them and they'll sort of leave the UXO issue for sometimes before they can go back to their duties and pick on the managing the UXO issue in Solomon Islands. As John has said, I work with the EOD, the Explosive Ordnance Disposal, the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force, for quite a good long years, about 20 years. And I see that issue coming up, people killed, people injured by this UXO. So I decided to resign from RSIPF, and I've started a local clearance firm in 2019. So that's when I started picking up the work doing UXO clearance apart from police work. The police do responses, they do disposal, and our local firm just do clearance, and we hand over the ammunition to RSIPF. The issue at the moment is, this is my own view, not from where I previously worked as a police officer, but this is my own view. The awareness should have started on the primary level up to the secondary level. The students learn about the Second World War, but they do not teach them about the dangers of UXO in Solomon Islands. So that is an issue that popping up actually in Solomon Islands. the government sort of picking up these issues on high standard rather than developing the awareness where through the early stages, the primary stages. So that is also an issue, the awareness. Rightly, here in Solomon Islands, most of the people, the students, even the adults, do not, do not know the very basic or the dangers of UXO unless people killed. And the media people sort of putting up all the stories up in the papers and the radios, and people started to know the dangers of UXO here in Solomon Islands. And actually, in terms of funding, Australia, Japan, and US who currently funding the police alone to do training and supporting them with equipments. And the government is supporting the operations in terms of rations and tours to the other provinces. Japanese government just came on board this year and started supporting the Royal Solomon Islands EOD unit into UXO, response to other provinces. So currently they are picking on the third point. But the point I want to share with you here is that the government, I would say that is not prioritizing these issues at the moment. There is an UXO policy that the cabinet has looked into, and it is on the level of cabinet states of being debated in the parliament to become an ordinance, a new UXO policy. So it is currently at the cabinet stage. So what actually happened here is that during the recent killings, incidents that the people were killed by UXOs and injured by UXOs, the government is so, was so excited to, to come up with the policy. But when the issues of the incidents of the longer it takes, the government sort of forget about the policy at the moment. They've set up a technical committee, but at the moment, I did not see the working, the technical committee. So it's quite intensive here in Solomon Islands that it's the issue to tackle the UXO the way to tackle the issue, the UXO issue here in Solomon Islands, should be collaborative in a holistic way, whereas the government should be there, local firms should be there, the RSIPF should be there, and I do not understand why did the government hasn't a request for more funding. They train civilians to do UXO clearance in Asia. They train civilians to do UXO clearance in Africa, Middle East, and Europe. And I think there is no difference apart from the issue of UXO here in Solomon Islands. In terms of the private firms here in Solomon Islands, it's quite expensive for us to purchase latest equipments to do UXO scanning. Usually we ordered our equipments from Germany, and it's quite very expensive. And the work we do here in Solomon Islands, people, they do not have money to, to be able to pay for private firms to do clearance for the areas. So it's quite a complicated issue to do with the funding. Because what actually happened at the moment, the work we do, especially for my firm, mostly the work we've done were funded by the European Union, Australian government, New Zealand government. But for the locals, they do not have money to buy the local firms to do clearance on the areas. So that's why that's when the government should step in and ask for funding, a humanitarian funding to cater for these in assistance to the local communities who do not have who do not have money to pay the local firms to do clearance of the areas. So at the moment, the government is quite, it's not prioritizing the UXO issue here in Solomon Islands, unless there is an issue that, especially if there's an incident that happened, then you started seeing the government talking about the UXO. But as the days pass, they seems to forget about the issue of UXO here in Solomon Islands. One thing I have suggested is that there should be a wider consultation and awareness to the communities. We have lots of youths here in Solomon, each group here in Solomon Islands. The government should, sort of engaging the youths down to the village level, engaging in doing awareness to the villagers about the dangers of UXO here in Solomon Islands. What is currently going on at the moment, in terms of UXO clearance, the Royal Solomon Islands Police Force is no longer doing the UXO clearance. They are just, doing responses for explosive ordnance disposal. And the private firms were the ones doing UXO clearance here in Solomon Islands, where there's no much funding, not much assistance from the government at the moment. I think that is a brief contribution I can support John Rodsted with. John.
Thank you, Michael, for that, and we might just keep going, and then we'll bring in Jeanne Wells, and on things to do with killer robots. Jeanne, yours now.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah. And thank you, John and Michael, for your comments on legacy weapons in the Pacific. I will be talking a bit more from a preemptive peace building standpoint about the Pacific campaign to stop killer robots, the threat it poses to the region, and ways forward. So machines are replacing humans in the application of force with unpredictable and potentially devastating consequences for all of humanity. And treaty negotiations in the UN have been blocked by highly militarized states, and the negotiations will now take place outside the UN framework. So we see this as a powerful opportunity to ensure perspectives and inputs which are specific to Pacific communities are recognized in a global treaty. So just to give you a bit of a background on the campaign, it's a global campaign coalition of more than 190 NGOs in over 65 countries. It's a shared movement against digital dehumanization. So we promote peace, justice, human rights, equality, respect for law, and not automated killing. I'm a researcher at SafeGround, And SafeGround has, like John has said, has documented the impacts of conflicts and weapons around the world. And in the Pacific, the SafeGround have worked since the early 1990s. Since last year, we have worked to get killer robots on the Pacific agenda. And so these are the reasons why we are engaging Peacebuilders on autonomous weapons and why we ourselves are running the Pacific campaign. So we know many weapons have been tested in developing countries. The Pacific, like it said before, have been a battlefield in World War II and a testing ground for nuclear weapons. And physical, environmental, and socioeconomic consequences from all these events still carry on today. So we're concerned about the new risks autonomous weapons pose. And the machine errors of these autonomous weapons could have catastrophic impacts if they are tested and deployed. And the challenge we face for peace building in the Pacific is garnering support for weapons that seem like a futuristic threat, one that might not exist yet, or one that people don't know is coming. But what we do know is that they are being heavily invested in by major military powers. And so this investment in AI and weapons technology will amplify global power imbalances or existing global power imbalances. And the proliferation of these weapons would deteriorate global insecurity, exacerbate racial and gender bias, and undermine human dignity by dehumanizing people and treating humans as data. And so the Pacific occupies vast parts of the ocean between global powers, and therefore there's a risk of being drawn into such wars with the use of such weapons. So the Sustainable Development Goals and the Blue Pacific Strategy both highlight climate change and peace and security as a major focus in the region, but these weapons challenge those goals. AI in weapons technology is not carbon neutral. It uses masses of energy, masses of natural resources, producing masses of greenhouse gases. And despite being one of the largest emitters, military activity emissions are often left off global targets like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. But it is the Pacific Islands who are immediately threatened by global warming. And to add, the big power rivalry between China and America in the region makes the use of these weapons a real possibility. And we don't want to see the development and deployment of these weapons be at the expense of the oceans and the lands that people depend on for their lives and livelihoods. So when we have investigated the Pacific and garnered support there, we have seen how AI has been embraced for uses for good. So we found AI projects that promote healthy biodiversity, healthy fishing communities, and marine research, just to name a few. And we are seeing how these AI projects are addressing sustainable development goals and the themes set out in the Blue Pacific Strategy. And while we celebrate these AI for good stories, we also want to raise the issue of the dual use of AI in autonomous weapons and how it will contradict these goals. And the strategy also highlights the continuation of Pacific Islands working together to promote people, environment, culture, natural resources. So we think this is key in Pacific peace building. The Pacific have a huge voice at the UN through their number of states, as well as their commitment to peace. And these nations have played an important role in the development of international treaties against weapons in the past, being nuclear weapons, landmines, and cluster munitions. It gives the Pacific a key role in advocating for peace to ban killer robots to promote peace, security, and climate change mitigation. So we have been reaching out to Pacific leaders in Capital and representatives at the UN in New York, where discussions have actually already begun. And we hope in the next few months, Pacific Island states will release statements against autonomous weapons at the United Nations General Assembly. So that's what we've been working towards. And another important part of our campaign in the Pacific is outreach to civil society groups. And many students and peace activists in Fiji have shown interest in the issue and in our campaign. Some of these activists champion the treaty on nuclear weapons in the region. So we're hopeful that Fijian peace groups will establish a new campaign there, which we believe will be the first of many. And I'll just finish off by saying that this is all part of an ongoing project. So please feel free to share your thoughts or ideas in the chat. And I'd also like to put my email address in the chat for those who might want to be involved or who have any further questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeanne, for that. And I think in terms of the overall presentation, starting with Yauka and then myself, and then with, of course, John and Michael, we've certainly gone the full span, if you like, for want of a better way of putting it, in terms of PNG, and particularly in terms of cultural communities and the inter-community conflicts and processes of peacemaking, and then to the changing landscape of different systems of governance, of processes of conflict resolution, and then of course onto the Pacific in relation to it being a region of great conflict between powers, between different countries with different pursuits, and of course the legacies of that to resolving situations where lives are endangered, and how we need to resolve those, and the support in terms of processes that are put in place and organizations that are responsible for ensuring that there is the legacies of war, and some of those are better managed and supported. And then, of course, now to the emerging technologies in terms of AI and the kinds of developments that the world is now seeing, and how they stand in relation to the Pacific. And of course, Pacific, as we learned through Michael and John, has had its share of conflict at a, if you like, regional level. And in the context of the changing environment, how that landscape could well be tethering on the edge of some possibilities. And now that the US and China, and might I say Australia, and a lot of the interests within the Pacific of how economic interests have translated into other challenges, and how peace might be negotiated in all of those. So yeah, that's just by way of a summary of giving us a sense of a landscape, an overall set of perspectives that have been put in for us. But I'll terminate here in relation to my summaries, and really allow for comments and questions from this, and how probably best to manage that is, and I'll need the help of Jeanne, if you can, and we can look at raised hands possibly, and see how we could go that way, or in the chat room with some of the comments that have come through and questions that have been placed there, and we could go that way. So Jeanne, if you could come in there and see how we could better manage some of the discussions, although I know that our allotted time, we might just be on the verge of completing our time there, but given the range of the coverage of peace and the conflicting situations and how we need to resolve peace, it's been great in the way that it's spanned out, not by design, but the way things have fallen in, I think. And I must stop there. Thanks, Jeanne.
Thanks, Michael. So if anybody has any questions, there's a hand function which signifies that you're putting your hand up to ask a question. Otherwise, put them in the chat here. And I would like to start. So Frank Vavasawa, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, wants to ask Yauka or Michael, is Milne Bay different from other areas in PNG regarding conflict?
Yes, it's answered in the chat already, and I think they said yes.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, yeah, so it's answered for me. It's only a specific question because my father fought in Milne Bay, and I was just sort of little follow-up curiosity, really. But I've got one question is that how are people in the islands going to get governments to how can Australia help? You know, help prompt our government to address these, you know, like safe issues of munitions and in the area.
I'm more than happy for Michael, if you have any response, or Yauka for that matter, and Unika to add to that in relation to this question. Yeah, any one of you twos, and I'm happy to add if need be, but otherwise I'll leave it to you two.
Maybe it's better to move on, I think. Then.
No, yeah. Well, firstly, there's some Australia, of course, within the Pacific, and historically, particularly for PNG, of course, the legacies of history in relation to colonization and all of that issue aside, the way in which Australia as a partner in development, if you like, has been taken in very, I suppose, very briefly, or at least in this context, either as where you create development where PNG, by and large, is seen as lacking. And so the way in which Western economies, in this case Australia, has come in as, because you lack, we'll support. That can be a good thing, but woven into it can also be political and cultural intricacies that need to be negotiated a little more carefully. And some of those aspects are now beginning to come through to saying, if there's been a challenge where if someone's lacking, but that lack may not necessarily be there, but our perception of someone's lacking. So balancing between cultural expectations and processes as opposed to development as measured in terms of GDP, exports, all the rest of it. How do we negotiate that? And so there's been some discussions, and I certainly know that in my discussions and some of the relationships that I've formed in terms of our group, where we are now talking about how Australia or any other donor agency needs to come in and work with, so that there's no, if there are any assumptions, let's put those on the table before you step in with your development agenda. And so the challenges do come in that way. But the challenges on the other side are, of course, with places like China coming in the manner and way in which they're going in, and that's also shaking up a lot of things. So there is a need for certainly discussions and negotiations in how best we can met out issues and challenges, particularly in peace and peace building. Given that that's the focus of our discussion this afternoon, how can we resolve ourselves in peace building using local processes, as it were, and also ideas from the outside that might help to alleviate some of the conflict or emerging conflicts. So I think there's a balance that needs to be struck. But definitely, I think help and support, certainly, but looking at the terrain and understanding the terrain so that there is a better balance, rather than some of the assumptions in the 80s and 90s where there was a lot of developmental support, and quite often, as it was once put, a lot of it came as boomerang aid. It came here in the form of aid, but it returned back to where it came from, and so forth and so on. Anyway, I'll stop here. Michael, if you have any comments, or Yauka, if you can hear us, if you have any comments, that would be great. But otherwise, yeah.
I wouldn't mind weighing in on that one, if I may. There's a simple thing that we used to bring up at the UN when we were doing the landmines treaty, and we'd say, nothing about us without us. And it was very much addressing that point that you're saying, Michael.
But you were breaking,
sorry.
so I didn't quite pick up much of what you were saying. Do you want me to try make some comments on some other areas related to questions that were posed earlier? Is that all right?
Yauka, thank you. Sorry, Jane. Yeah, Yauka, that would be great. I think at the moment, John Rodsted had the platform. So if you just give him a go, let him finish what he was saying, and then we might bring you in. Just let John finish.
Okay, thank you. And I'll keep this very brief. So the point being, and it runs on the back of what you're saying, Michael, is that all the Pacific nations need to have a good voice at the table with anything that's coming forward. And it's not about being dictated to by some of the big economic players and some of the big political players. And whether that's at a UN level, and sadly it's an expensive thing for anyone to attend any UN meeting, but it's an extremely useful forum to get into. And I don't necessarily mean General Assembly, but to get to some of the UN meetings where you can talk about the problems in your country and get access to the players who've potentially got the budget to help you solve them. That's one point. But to have the kind of dialogue with players like Australia, America, whoever, where the perspective of the Pacific Island nations is listened to and respected, and it's not dictated to by some of these bigger players. So I suppose I'll leave it at that. So it's about having a proper seat at the table where you can direct what you'd like to see done, as opposed to people trying to feed you their perspective.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Jane, I might just leave it to you just to direct the traffic on that one with Yauka. And Yauka, if you're listening, if you can hear us, if you had the previous comments and things that were mentioned, and also what John has mentioned, if you wanted to add something to that briefly.
Yauka, can you hear us? Feel free to add your comments. Add your comments now. Or I'm not sure if he can hear us.
Okay, thank you.
Oh.
Thank you. Well, firstly, I was trying to respond to a question in the chat about whether the police have been peace building processes. I think the short answer there is no, I don't think the police are given that training. Police are receiving traditional policing training. So that's an area that the police hierarchy and others probably even like us in this conversation needs officers that is deploying to address inter-conflicts, and obviously they need proper skills, competencies in approach to illusion. So in curriculum, yes, the police need that. They would, all officers and senior NCOs going through the training and courses in at the Bomana Police Training College need to have these courses as a standalone or parts of it integrated into the training curriculum. So the officers are there in the field attending to community conflict methods will have basic understanding of conflict resolution. So that's an area I would recommend the police hierarchy need to look into. But you also need to include other government agencies. Military is frequently been used. The PNG government is in police traditional
Can't hear.
policing roles. So the in PNG, the police, the military training in peacemaking, conflict resolution courses as well as. I think I should also say the government civic institution of leadership needs to embrace this as well, because many government officers from the
Oh, I think we've just lost Yauka. Well, I think in the interest of time, unfortunately, Yauka won't be able to finish off his comments. Hopefully we can, oh, here he is. Yauka? Yauka, if you'd like to finish off your comments, we'll have a few more minutes and then we'll end the call. No worries. Well, Yauka, you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I was saying going forward, the authorities need to look at relevant short-term causes.
Yauka, if you can hear us.
Few weeks causes, provide the necessary competencies working in districts. And you will also want, and in those courses, maybe I should, yes, I can hear you. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yep, carry on, Yauka.
Hello there, can you hear me? Oh, okay. And I think important for me to also stress that in those courses, they need to integrate the traditional or cultural, integrated with the modern conflict resolution, peace building processes. I think that's an important point that I should highlight.
Thank you so much for your comments, Yauka.
Would there be any? Thank you.
Thank you. So do we have any final comments from any of the speakers or the audience?
Yes, please go ahead.
Well, I think we might wrap it up here. I just want to say thank you all. Thank you to Dr. Michael Mell, to Yauka, Liria, Michael Macca, and John Rodsted for sharing your insights and experiences into peace building in the Pacific. And thank you to the audience for joining us and for sticking with us through a few technical difficulties and blackouts, and for participating in this discussion today. So the recording of this session will be on the Raising Peace website in the next few weeks. So I hope you all have a great day wherever you are, and thanks again, and goodbye.